All right, this is day 4 on the Ducati. We're going to start getting into the valves themselves, opening up the valve heads, looking at the shims and taking measurements. So we'll start chipping away at that. Yeah, it's going to be fun. All right, so we'll start by removing this cover here and just looking at that one first. And then we got the next one right here. And then the other two down in front. So it's a number 5 Allen key. So we will start just prying that open. Just noting here that the covers themselves are pretty tight because they have an O-ring holding them in, and there's just also a lot of heat and oil that kind of just seals them. It's hard to see, but there's a little tiny notch right there. So what I did before, what I'm gonna do is just put a flathead screwdriver right there, and just gently with like a hammer, just kind of tap it. It'll start to just allow the cover to break loose, and then you can kind of pull it off with your hand. And then just be aware that some oil may drip out. So what I'm gonna do is just put a rag on this, clean up the outside to begin with, and then keep a rag like right here in case any extra oil does just leak out. All right, and there we are. First one is opened. You can see the valves there and the rocker arms. And if I were to spin the cranking tool, you can see it does eventually start to move up and down. Right there. All right, we have both heads open now at the top. So it's kind of hard to see, obviously, in this form, but Desmotimes has a great little diagram here showing everything from the opener shim right here, and the closer on the bottom, the valve stems, of course, the cam in the middle, and then these are the opening rockers on top, with the clearance being right in between the rocker and the shim. Same thing on the bottom with the closing rockers, the clearance being right in between the rocker and the shim. And so yeah, there's also specifications here, what Ducati recommends, and then what Desmotimes kind of has is his settings. So we'll just be comparing both. We're obviously going to measure, see where we're at currently with ours, but then kind of take all the advice into account. Same thing with the Haynes manual, and we'll see what this says about clearances, and see where we're at. Just making a note here, it says with the valve covers off, clean off the mating surfaces of the cover plate and the head. So just making sure that I do that. Once I start to put things back together, I want obviously to put them back in pristine condition so that there's no oil leaks or just any risk of anything coming loose. There also seems to be Loctite on the screws, on the 4 screws that hold the covers in. So just going to be reusing some of that and trying to do things as properly as possible. Another quick note here. A lot of, or most of the cover bolts I saw were pretty corroded. So I may actually order some of these stainless steel ones from Desmotimes. It'll go a long way. Might as well just protect the valve covers in that way. They're not terrible, but you can see there definitely is a good amount of corrosion on the top. And why not just get some better ones that will hold and last longer. Okay, one thing that the Desmotimes manual does recommend is plugging this oil drain hole. That hole right there on the right side of the rocker is good, just kind of a hole for oil to kind of get down into the bottom of the engine. What I'm going to do is he recommends putting this bolt, you can see the hole there, he recommends putting like this M6 bolt or whatever in there and tying a little string to it so you can pull it out. While, you know, that's probably better, I just kind of got this 5.5 hex key, Allen key, and tied a zip tie on it. So I'm just gonna stick that in there instead. It should work. You know, I cleaned it off, so it shouldn't have any gunk or anything on there. Yeah, and I'll just have to remember, obviously, to take it out before we close everything up. Yeah, and I just forgot to mention that the main purpose of doing this is just so some of the collets, the little, there's like little metal half rings that go on each side of the closing shims, just so that if those fall off, they don't get down into the hole and are gone forever. So that's the main purpose of it. Okay, so I'm still trying to wrap my head fully around how exactly we're supposed to be taking the measurements, but this is my understanding thus far. We need to measure the opening and closing of each cylinder head, so 1, 2, 3, 4. And I have a little sheet here that I'll go over that just has everything written down so I don't forget. So let's look here. Okay, so this top one is the opening arm, and where we'll be measuring is right in between the end of the rocker arm here, and then this circular thing is the shim, so right in between there. The closing is on the reverse side, so you can see there's another arm on the bottom, looks like, you know, kind of two forks like that pushing that shim up. That's the closing arm that we'll also be measuring, top and bottom, and I'll show the illustration for that. So here's that opening arm with that shim, and right in between the two, very specifically, right here is where we're measuring with the feeler gauges. The bottom closing arm is right here, and we're measuring right in between this arm and the shim with the feeler gauges. So when we talk about opening shim, we're talking about the top, and then closing shim, we're talking about this bottom one here. Okay, and we have intake and exhaust. So you can see for this vertical cylinder here, the intake is in the front, so this would be the intake side, this would be the exhaust side, because it goes to the exhaust right there, which then wraps around to the front. I'll kind of show that here on this side as well. You can see the exhaust pipe coming up from right there. So here, this is the exhaust one because it's right next to the exhaust pipe here, and this is the intake on top because it's right next to the intake box. So we have to obviously do both sides for each. And then as far as spec goes, factory spec is listed here. It's the same for opening and closing on both vertical and horizontal. Desmo Times recommends about 0.1, so we're going to aim for that, and then less than 0.5 or 0.05 for the closing. So yeah, we're going to start taking the measurements, and I'll just film when I'm doing that. There's also two different ways to record the closing shims here. So one way that you can do it is by just putting the feeler gauge right in the bottom there, or you can take a depressor tool or just a flathead screwdriver and push this arm down. Basically, just it'll be negligible, just a little bit, and the spring is what is holding it up. So basically you'll be like disengaging the spring, and then you measure the top again, and then subtract that from your top clearance. So there's two different ways to do it. I'm going to do both just to see if I get in the same ballpark, and we'll go from there. Okay, so what I have here is 4 different options. We have the 0.09, 0.1, 0.13, and 0.15. We're obviously aiming for the 0.1, so we're going to start with the 0.9 and then go up. And what we're looking for is for it to slide through, but with a bit of tension or pull. It shouldn't just kind of go through in and out, no problem. That's probably too much of a gap. but it also shouldn't have to be shoved in and just like really pushed. So it kind of should have some resistance, but go through and pull out, but like definitely feel some tension as you're pulling out. Another very key thing is to have to measure at top dead center. So what that means is when the valve is closed or the piston is up, not down. So when I turn this crank here, you'll see, once I keep going, you'll see it starts to go down here and then it's up. And so this is at its resting stage here. So while it's up is where you want to measure. And we want to do that for all four, but of course, because they're in their unique, they all fire at a different time. You know, while that one's up, these might be down, or it just depends on the firing order. But you just want to make sure you're measuring while it's in that resting position there. And one other thing I'll note, just on top dead center, which I found out, I think just through trial and error. So basically, yeah, it's measuring at that rest period, but a good rule of thumb I found is to measure when the other side of the same cylinder is basically beginning to engage and the valve is going down. So if you're measuring, let's say on that horizontal cylinder and you're trying to take the intake measurement, once the exhaust side starts to go down, that's a good time to take the intake because you know it's back into like its resting position. So I just kind of use that rule of thumb for all four measurements and got consistent results. So we're going to start with the 0.9. That goes in pretty easy, not too much resistance. 0.1, definitely more resistance, that feels pretty good. 0.3 or 0.13 rather, it doesn't actually go in at all. 0.5, yeah, not even close. So 0.1, that's good, that's right where we want to be. So that was our horizontal cylinder on the opening side, and it was the intake. Okay, so intake, opening, it was 0.1, and that's good, that's perfect. Okay, I waited before taking off this exhaust horizontal cylinder head just because there's more than likely going to be some oil buildup here that will fall out, so I just wanted to wait, but we'll do it now. It does have a different bolt here, just kind of holding this wire for I think some O2 sensor or something. It takes a number 3 Allen to undo this bolt here. All right, I got the oil pan here and just some paper towels kind of covering the exhaust in case the oil does end up spilling while we open this. Well, the assumptions were correct. There's definitely some oil, not too much though. And I just got a new rag there to catch any drips. But yeah, now we have access to this exhaust horizontal head so we can take the measurements. Okay, so we've taken all the measurements for the opening shims on both the horizontal and vertical cylinders. I'm going to save the closing shims for now just because those are a bit harder to get access to and to actually measure. And it looks like pretty much all but the opening intake, that one was perfect. The exhaust, I couldn't even get the 0.03 in, which is the thinnest one, the smallest one. Same thing on the exhaust for the vertical cylinder on the opening shim. The intake side was a bit better. It was like either 0.13 or 0.14. So basically we're gonna have to replace all 3 of those. So that's where we'll go next. We'll just start to take the top rocker arms off and get those replaced. All right, the next thing we're gonna do to take the opening rocker arms off is to get rid of this clip. It's just a metal clip that kind of goes in like this to hold the arm from being able to slide to the right. You can get a flathead screwdriver on there as well and just try to pry it off. It'll just come kind of out like this, it moves. You can feel it kind of move around. So it's just a clip that's holding this in place, and then eventually it'll slide to the right. So it's an incredibly small, tight space in there. There's probably no way I could get a good shot of it, but if you can see the one screwdriver here kind of pulling the bottom down and the bigger one pushing the top out, that's basically the process of what I use to get it out. Of course, putting it back in is much easier because you just kind of push it in, but ultimately this is what it looks like. And you know, to go back in, it would just fit right in there. All right, another weird angle here, but basically once the clip's off, now you want to get this rocker arm to slide to the side where the clip came off of, because now there's that empty space there. So what you have to do is rotate the engine or the crank with the tool until basically this valve is just about to go down. So I think that's when it's opening technically. So right when it's about to open, there's a little like notch that allows this to move. And you can see right now, you can't, it's locked. So we'll turn the engine, and then right when we get right there, right where it starts to move, it's locked right now. Okay, I may have gone too far. So we'll check it as I'm cranking it. There it is. So you see, now it moves, and you can feel how like if you hold it really up, it'll still be kind of locked, but if you push it down a little bit, it'll move. And then if you were to crank just a little further, now if you hold it up, it will slide easier. So it's just positioning of where the engine is. But yeah, move it off, take the shim right off of there, get the new one on. So I'm gonna continue taking off the opening shims, cleaning them, spraying them with WD-40, getting them clean, and then measuring them with this measuring tool and the micrometer or micrometer. Actually, these are the digital calipers, but same thing basically. I didn't film yesterday, just something that my wife and I did together. Basically, we wanted to measure the closing shims, so what I had her do was place the feelers in the opening shim location as we did to measure the opening shims, but while I was pushing down with a screwdriver on the closing rocker arm. And so it was a little awkward, but while I was pushing down on the edge of the rocker, not pushing the closing shim, because I noticed that was actually creating more of a gap, maybe because it was moving the valve itself or something, but pushing right on the left side of that closing rocker arm right there, and then she was measuring, and basically we would take the combined measurement, subtract the measurement of the opening shim itself to get the closing clearance. So I have those written down. What I'm going to do is start to clean off the opening shims, so because I can take those off now and measure those, and then later tonight my wife's going to come back and we're going to do the same thing with the the vertical cylinder up here. I'll push down, she'll measure from the top on both sides, and yeah, with those measurements then we'll be able to see which shims to order. So we're going to start taking these top shims, opening shims, out from the horizontal intake and exhaust side. So I'm making a little chart here just to place exactly where my shims are and what their measurements are and everything. I've cleaned it off now at this point, and it's hard to tell, but you'll notice there is numbers on the side of it, just noting the size of the shim. if you hold it next to the light, those numbers do become visible. It's really hard to tell, but yeah, I'll just be noting that here on the little chart that I made and everything. And I'm not going to keep them all out at the same time, so I'm basically going to take the measurements, note it all down here, and then put it back in. That way, while I'm turning the engine to get the other ones out, nothing's kind of out of place. I don't know if this is totally necessary or not. I just feel safer doing it this way. So I'm going to do everything I can while it's out by taking measurements and then put it back in. Okay, so if we're taking measurements using these calipers, first you want to zero it out. So you just close it, press the 0 button, and then first we're going to measure our tool that we're using. We got from Decimal Times. You kind of want to like fish it through a little bit so it's not completely stuck, just to get an accurate measurement. So we're looking at 12.2, and then what we do is add the opening shim to the end just like that. It'll sit right on there, and we're going to measure them together. Oops. So it looks like 14.9 minus 12.2 would be 2.7, and that's exactly what this shim said it was. On the writing it said 2A. It's so hard to see, but yeah, it said 2A 2.7. So the shim is the size that it says it is, which is helpful, just so we know everything's accurate, and we'll just mark that measurement and we'll be good. And that's the first one. Just a quick reminder here, before you start to get into taking the closing shim off and the half rings and everything, you do want to plug that hole there on the bottom right on every valve head every time you're doing it, because if half rings fall, they can fall in that hole and they're gone forever. So you want to plug that with something just so that they can't fall in there. Also, before you put the clip back on up here, there are washers. I think it's pinned to the right. Be hard to see, but it's pinned to the right side there. There should be one on each side, I believe. That's what it says on the Decimal Times book. I'm going to look here. But you basically want to have one washer on each side and put the clip in the middle. All right, so at this point, I have taken the measurements of all of the opening shims for every valve head and measured it with the digital calipers, as well as just compared it to the measurement, the number that's on the shim itself. One of the shims didn't have any numbers on it at all. Must have just been a replacement one or something like that, or maybe it got worn off. So I'm just going off of the actual measurement from the calipers for that one, but that's fine. And then for the closing shims, I've measured all of them now by doing the loaded unloaded method, measuring the gap of the opening shim and then pushing down on the closing rocker, measuring again, and subtracting the total gap from the opening shim gap without any load on the rocker, and to get the gap of the closing shim. So I've measured those. I've also taken a look at the numbers on all the closing shims to get the size of them, and because they're all so minuscule and close in just the gap itself, I'm just gonna basically buy, if I need a replacement, buy the closing shim size I think I need, and then buy one above and one below, and we should be good. Once I get all the tools from Decimal Times, I will take them out and actually measure them with the calipers, and if one of them's way off and I just need to order another one, so be it. But yeah, at this point, I'm just going to be ordering the shims that I need and some of the other tools, and in the meantime, we'll just work on some other stuff in the bike, like just kind of checking all the general health of like the shocks, the wheels, the bearings, the chain, just going through the other inspection points that the decimal service entails. And so I'll film all that and just be working on that while we wait for the parts to arrive. So that'll do it for this video. It's a long one, and yeah, just interesting, funny process, kind of getting all these shims measured, but we made it, and we'll hopefully have some fresh good ones in there soon.